Taiwan. I'm Reece with news from here in Taiwan and around the world. In a major turnaround, US President Donald Trump has put a 90-day pause on his so-called reciprocal tariffs on dozens of countries. The tariffs announced a week ago were, quote, liberation from what Trump says is other countries taking advantage of the US. The pause excludes China, which now faces an even higher tariff than before. Joyce Tung has more on what this means for Taiwan.
A sharp turn after days of market turmoil. U.S. President Donald Trump pauses the sweeping so-called reciprocal tariffs on dozens of countries, levies that sent stocks across the world tumbling. The higher tariffs on roughly 60 countries have been lowered to 10% for 90 days. That's except for China, which faces an increased levy of 125%. Trump says the pause is something he's written up after thinking about it over the last few days.
We wrote it up from our hearts, right? We don't want to hurt countries that don't need to be hurt, and they all want to negotiate. The only problem is, you can only do so many at one time.
Earlier this week, the White House said around 70 countries had already reached out to strike a deal. Taiwan, which had been bracing for a 32% tariff on most of its goods going to the U.S., had offered to start negotiations on the basis of zero tariffs. President Lai Ching-te already ruling out retaliatory tariffs. Speaking to lawmakers, Foreign Minister Lin Jialong confirmed that Taiwan is among those to get the 90-day reprieve.
你们有没有去确认台湾是不是这些被暂停的 some countries？ 我们有没有在那里面？有确认了吗？
是。Taiwan's markets were a sea of red amid the news, a good thing here in Taiwan, indicating stocks were bouncing back. The country's benchmark TAIEX regaining over 1,600 points, closing up 9.25% after falling sharply for days. Ling says Taiwan is prepared to negotiate with the added time and address Taiwan's large trade surplus with the U.S., a trade imbalance Trump has criticized.
我们也一方面做好了各种方案的准备。行政院基于我国家安全及利益，已经完成盘点对农工、石油、天然气等产品的大量采购计划。
Officials say they're using multiple channels to reach their U.S. counterparts, including the U.S. Treasury, Commerce Department, and Trade Agency. Trade negotiator Yan Huixing saying they're on the list for talks. The government has also taken stock of state-owned assets and says it has prepared a multi-billion-dollar sum to negotiate with.
大概应该有2000亿美金可以谈了，还在整合民间可能购买的金额多少。那这样子一包去跟他谈的话，可能更能够有诱因了。
With several countries looking to get to the negotiating table with Washington, Taiwan officials say it's unclear when and in what order Trump's team will talk with governments. Taipei reiterating that it's ready to meet with its largest international backer at any time. Patrick Chen and Joyce Zhen for TaiwanPlus.
Trump's 90-day tariff pause has brought some reprieve to global markets that experienced a week of volatility, but China has hit back at the US, calling Washington selfish and accusing it of undermining the global trading system after it was excluded from the pause. Rosie Greninger reports.
Stocks on Wall Street surge as Donald Trump suddenly reversed what he called reciprocal tariffs against countries across the globe. The US president had last week imposed higher taxes on dozens of America's trade partners, bringing the total rate for some countries to over 50%. But after a week of turbulence in the exchange and fears of a recession, Trump announced a 90-day break to allow room for negotiations.
I did a 90-day pause for the people that didn't retaliate, because I told them if you retaliate, we're going to double it.
All countries will now be subject to the same baseline 10% tariff rate, except China. Trump has zeroed in on the world's second largest economy, hiking levies to 125%, effective immediately. That's after Beijing fought back, introducing their own 84% retaliatory levies against Washington, accusing the US of bullying.
美方仍在对中国滥施关税，一味地进行极限施压， 对这种霸道霸凌行径，中方坚决反对，绝不接受。美方如果真的想通过对话谈判解决问题，就应该拿出平等、尊重、互惠的态度。
China has filed a second complaint with the World Trade Organization, telling the international regulator the tariffs threaten to destabilize global trade. The country has also attempted to make alliances with other countries, urging Australia to join forces, an offer Canberra has declined. That's as global markets rebounded after Trump paused tariffs, with Australian and Asian markets tracking gains.
I think everybody's breathing a sigh of relief because it's been extremely chaotic for the last few days. Obviously, this leaves us with at least 90 days of slightly more stability than we've had, which is great. I think it puts investors in a position where they can hopefully reset, regroup, and probably rebalance.
Trump's aides say the 90-day pause will allow world leaders time to bargain with the US. More than 70 countries are in contact with the Trump administration, looking to secure a deal.
This was driven by the president's strategy. He and I had a long talk on Sunday, and this was his strategy all along. And that, you might even say that he goaded China into a bad position. They responded. They have shown themselves to the world to be the bad actors, and we are willing to cooperate with our allies and with our trading partners who did not retaliate.
Trump continues to insist China wants to make a deal with the US, despite the country vowing to fight until the end. And with unprecedented levies imposed against each other, the tit-for-tat measures will continue to have global impacts. Dolphine Chen and Rosie Greninger for TaiwanPlus.
Asian stock markets have followed gains on Wall Street after Donald Trump suspended his so-called reciprocal tariffs on all countries except China. Stock indexes in Hong Kong, Shanghai and Shenzhen are up, despite an increase in US levies on the country and Beijing's own retaliatory tariffs. While in Taiwan, the TAIEX saw one of the biggest gains in Asia, closing up 9%. Japan's Nikkei and South Korea's Kospi have also rebounded. Taiwan's central bank governor says despite the gains, much uncertainty remains in the market. US President Donald Trump has signed an executive order aimed at reviving domestic shipbuilding and countering China's dominance in the sector. The order directs US ports to begin charging $1 million or more in docking fees to Chinese-built or Chinese-flagged vessels. The proposal has been criticized by US importers and trade groups, who warn the new fees could cause supply chain disruptions, inflation, and job losses. A recent report by the Center for Strategic and International Studies found that more than half of the world's ships are now built in China. Only 0.1% are built in the United States. The government is requiring 10,000 Chinese spouses in Taiwan to provide documentation proving that they've given up their household registration in China, a move that has drawn criticism from the opposition Kuomintang.
很多陈情的案件是包括说，他们来到台湾已经超过30年了，当初没有要求他们缴交证明，而他们现在早就已经领有身份证，而且也成为中华民国的国民。
Taiwan requires that Chinese nationals applying for a Taiwanese ID card must first give up their household registration in China. Taiwan's immigration agency found no records for over 10,000 Chinese spouses, and it's giving them a 3-month deadline to provide such proof. Officials say they'll grant special consideration to people who are unable to return to China for political or health reasons, and those who have not been to China in the past 10 years.
如果当事人还有其他确实无法附录的事由，政府会继续会诊、反映意见、滚动检讨。那有需要政府协助，请假移民署。
The law requiring Chinese spouses to give up their household registration in China was put in place in 2004. Officials said the vast majority of spouses have been able to submit such documentation. Beijing has rejected evidence that Chinese nationals are fighting for Russia in their invasion of Ukraine.
这种说法毫无根据， 中方在乌克兰危机问题上的立场是清晰的、明确的，得到国际社会的广泛认可。
The statement comes after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said his country's forces captured 2 Chinese mercenaries in Ukraine's east. He said Ukraine's military has identified 155 Chinese nationals fighting for Russia, many recruited on social media. The US has accused China of providing Moscow with equipment used in its war effort, despite Beijing remaining officially neutral in the conflict. To learn what the possibility of Chinese soldiers fighting for Russia means for the 3-year war in Ukraine, our reporter Adil Bra spoke to Stephen Nagy, a professor at International Christian University in Tokyo.
What does Ukraine capturing 2 Chinese nationals fighting for Russia signal to the world?
We don't know if these were recruited by the Russian government or if they're hired hands or mercenaries, being hired by the Russian government to, again, provide support to Russian soldiers. But what it does suggest is that there is a segment of Chinese society, however small, that's interested in supporting Russia's efforts to defeat Ukraine. It also suggests that there is some facilitation by the Chinese government in terms of allowing its citizens to be participate in the war, in Russia's war against Ukraine.
Could the presence of Chinese soldiers on the Russian side strain China-Russia relations?
So up to now, there's been substantial evidence suggesting that China has not provided direct military support to Russia, but has provided assets and machinery and equipment via third countries to support the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We haven't had strong evidence until now that actual Chinese nationals are supporting Russia in its aggression towards Ukraine. What it means for Russia-China relations at this stage is pretty difficult to say, but it does mean that, again, there's a segment of Chinese society that believes in Russia's war against Ukraine and in some of the broader initiatives. It could also mean that there is some sentiment in China for a similar action when it comes to cross-strait relations and the challenges associated with Taiwan-China relations.
How might the global South react to Chinese nationals taking up arms from Moscow?
Well, within the global South or developing countries, there's a strong sense that China has not been a direct participant in Russia's war of aggression. But at the same time, I do believe that those third countries that China has been using to export machinery and other equipment to support the Russian war efforts are very conscious that China is leveraging the war to gain benefit economically, but also to strengthen its growingly asymmetric relationship with Russia. What does this mean moving forward? It likely means that there'll be more evidence in Western countries and that China is involved in the war indirectly, that it's not an impartial player when it comes to finding peace and supporting peace.
That was Stephen Nagy from the International Christian University in Tokyo. Taiwan chip giant TSMC reported more than $25 billion of revenue for the first quarter of 2025, a more than 41% increase from the same period last year. The company reported $8.7 billion for the month of March alone. That's a 10% increase over the previous month and more than 46% higher than the same month last year. The firm will hold its quarterly shareholders meeting next week. Thank you for watching What's Up Taiwan. You can visit the TaiwanPlus website or follow our social media for more stories from Taiwan and around the world. Finally, check out these images of The Herds, a unique puppet show in Africa highlighting the impact of climate change. I'm Reece. Take care and see you next time.